I'm Andrew Sherman. I'm a Texas transplant who has always been in pursuit of art as a career. I've played in bands, pursued an acting career in Hollywood, but I found it behind the lens of a camera here in Dallas, Texas. I was born in New York. I've lived in Chicago, Los Angeles, Austin, but I love Dallas. There's a magical artistic scene in Dallas that mostly goes unnoticed to the outside world. This podcast is focused on what makes it so special and the people who make it thrive artistically. If you don't live here, and even if you do, you might not have heard of them. This is the Dallas Famous Podcast.
So who you gonna be? Who you gonna be when you're all grown up? Who you gonna be? Who you gonna be when you're all for us? Yeah.
Some people only know Pete Freedman as the bad boy of Dallas media, but he is really so much more. Freedman is a fully trained, old-school journalist who is able to successfully navigate and thrive in the modern technology-driven world of media. He was the music editor at the Dallas Observer, then created Central Track, an early online-only arts publication. He is now the digital content director for WFAA, and he isn't slowing down. This is a great chat that goes deep with one of the main people covering the Dallas scene for the last 15 years, so I hope you enjoy it. Hey, we're here with Pete Freedman. You've named yourself the bad boy of Dallas media. Does that still hold true?
Oh, it's canon.
Okay.
At this point.
How did that come about exactly?
I just thought it was funny.
Right.
Honestly.
Well, but it matches some of your journalistic style in the past anyway.
Yeah, maybe. I think, I've tried to make a career here in Dallas of not being afraid to take risks. Mm-hmm. And try, at the Observer when the time I got here and at Central Track when I launched that, we kind of had to, just because of the climate at the time, really kind of stand on top of the desk and wave our hands and scream to get attention. And just trying to take risks and things like that have always kind of been a hallmark of everything I've done here as a journalist professionally. And so far it's worked out pretty well. I think, no regrets. It's the risk you don't take, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'll be honest, like I am a photographer first. And so there's been a couple of times where I'm like, I don't know that I have a strong enough opinion to put myself out there because of the flack you're going to get in return. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the worst thing that happens is you go to a show or you go to an event and you're supposed to be reviewing it and it doesn't elicit a response either way. That is just that's nightmare fuel, right?
Yeah.
It's when you have a strong opinion either way that you're like, okay, this is a cinch, no problem.
Well, right, but if you have a strong opinion, I mean, yeah, you have to, as a journalist, you have to just like throw yourself out there. But I'm saying, like, in this day and age, it seems like that's where you get in trouble with people,
As far as sharing an opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you shouldn't be afraid, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know. I personally don't like getting shit. I mean, I haven't got that much shit. Usually it's like a stupid mistake that like, whatever. I don't care if people care. But, like the article I just did with the Broadhauser tribute, I'm really concerned that I honored everybody,
Yeah, that's a legit concern. I've that's kept me up at night too, wanting to just do right by the story, right?
Yeah.
I totally understand that. I think the bigger thing though is just people respect honesty and calling it like you see it and not being afraid to have that honesty and put that opinion out there. I think by the same token though, you shouldn't by any stretch put out an opinion that you don't stand by fully or that, one thing I think that a lot of young journalists in this town and beyond have fallen prey to is kind of overly clowning or celebrating something for the sake of doing so. Mm-hmm. And especially on the clowning side of things, that can get you into some sticky situations. And one thing that I learned early on and that I've tried to tell the many writers I've worked with over the years is don't you ever put to page something you wouldn't say to someone's face.
Yeah.
You got to be able to back it up. And that isn't to say don't be harsh, but these are people who are putting, especially in the music and creative world, they're putting their hearts and souls on the line by releasing something that's near and dear to them. And it's okay to say it's not great, but you should have some reasoning behind it.
Sure.
And I think believe me, I understand the temptation beyond it. I mean, there've been times at Central Track, I know, where we would write this glowing thing about this great new restaurant and it would do okay, and we would write a shitty thing about a restaurant no one ever heard about and it'd get 17 times more clicks.
Yeah.
There's as much as people like to say they love good news and they hate seeing negativity all the time, the truth is that the kind of human basic instinct is to be curious about the negative stuff, and clicks tend to follow that, which is a dangerous temptation.
Yeah, no, because when I first started paying attention to, like, when I moved to Dallas is when I started shooting, so I started paying attention to all of this stuff a lot more, and it's just, yeah, it just seems like that's, like, whenever it happened where, like, clicks were, like, I mean, it's always been driven by, you know, money at some level, but, like, the clicks specifically and the instant hits, it's like, it seems like there's a lot of people writing junk, but then at the same time, some of that is necessary to keep the views. It's like, it's,
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, it's you know, at Central Track in particular, you know, we had to do a lot to like get clicks, right? Because we had no money, no backing, no leg to stand on in the early years. No one knew who we were. I remember very early on in our story, a link would show up on Reddit, and the comments would just be, "What the hell is Central Track? Who cares?"
right.
Eventually, that changed. It was like, this is so typical of Central Track. Fuck them. And that was a win for us.
Right, that's so
but
funny.
at the same time, you know, I think people understand a shallow click, right? Once upon a time, and I don't know how it is at the Observer these days, but when I was there, just page views were it. That's what kind of we were judged on. And, you know, you probably understand this as a photographer. One way that manifested was just we did a million slideshows, because every time you went to the next photo, you'd click next on the gallery.
Right.
And it was a new page view, right? So it was kind of gaming the system in a way that people definitely caught on to, and that you definitely see like some junk websites doing now with like click next to find out what he said.
That I hate.
Which is the absolute worst.
Yeah.
I think these days, and credit where it's due, I don't think the Observer really does much of that anymore.
In fact, there's not
They'll
as
do
many
it inline
slideshows.
and within.
Like,
Say what?
there's not as many slideshows.
Yeah, but once upon a time, that was it. I mean, there's been so many kind of false North Stars in how to make journalism work over the years.
Yeah.
But what never fails and kind of always is gold is just doing good work and doing, you know, and being informative and entertaining, hopefully at the same time.
Sure.
And giving people a resource that they want more of.
Yeah, absolutely. We got really ahead of.
Did we?
It's good. No, I have a format that I never stick to, so let's not.
Well,
do
I
that
tend
now.
to get ahead of myself.
Yeah,
I've
I
made a
like
career
it.
out of it.
I mean, it's funny. Like, normally I'll write a bunch of questions and then people will answer them all in 5 minutes before I start, and then I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't know what to do. But I feel like we've got a lot of stuff we can talk about.
Well,
here.
I've always said the most important question isn't the one you write down; it's the follow-up question. It's about
Yeah.
listening to the person you're talking to,
Yeah.
and jumping in on the thing you find interesting.
Absolutely. That's what I've learned, and like, so I have less and less questions each time.
There you go.
But okay, so I know I'm just guessing you're not from Dallas. Where are you from?
I am from Boston.
Boston. Okay.
Yeah, I grew up in Boston, just outside of the city, but within the 128 loop, if you're familiar at all with Boston, but kind of within 635, if you will. And then I went to Syracuse for my undergrad and all my college, really. While in Syracuse, I worked at the college paper, the Daily Orange, and that's where, although I did write some for my high school paper in the Needham Times, which is the weekly paper in the town I grew up in, the Daily Orange is really where I cut my teeth. Did internships while in college, both at the Syracuse Post-Standard, which is their daily paper, and the Miami Herald. I did a summer internship down there, which was great and eye-opening and amazing in so many ways. And then from there, I kind of decided I wanted to get in the alternative journalism world. And alt weeklies were really kind of sang to me, having grown up reading the Boston Phoenix, which is a great, no longer in print alt weekly, one of the great ones, I would say. You know, just reading on the T, or kind of the light rail or subway, if you will, around Boston. And once I kind of made that decision, I reached out to some of the alumni network at the Daily Orange, who put me in touch with this person, put me in touch with that person. And eventually I ended up as the arts and entertainment editor at the Colorado Springs Independent, which was my first job out of college. And then after a year and a half there, through connections I made along the way, both in college and then out of college, I got hired to be the music editor at the Dallas Observer in 2008. And that's what brought me to town. So I've been here 15 years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So actually, you did it. You went ahead. Like, that's good. Like, you got,
Did
you
I
got
go
more,
ahead? Get
well,
ahead
you
of
got
myself
more.
again?
You got more answers in of like your history than I probably would have asked. But like what made you start wanting to write? Like, what was the first like inclination on that?
I think like a lot of people, I grew up, you know, as a young American male enjoying sports, and Boston's a big sports town. I grew up reading the renowned Boston Globe sports page, and initially I thought that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I started doing in my hometown paper and at my high school paper, and what I first did at my school paper in Syracuse at the Daily Orange. But then I just kind of got a little disillusioned with it. I liked being a fan of sports, and there were other things I was interested in and could write about beyond just sports. And there was also, frankly, just I entered that class at the college newspaper with a really talented group of sports writers who are still working great beats today for the Washington Post and the New York Times, and just out there absolutely killing it. And at the kind of my first inclination was just like, well, I'm not going to be able to write about the basketball and football team until like at least junior year with all these guys around and my age group. So what else can I explore? And I knew I was passionate about pop culture and music and movies and things like that. So I started exploring that part of the paper. It's called the Daily Orange, and the arts and entertainment stuff was in the middle of the paper. We called it Pulp, the sweet stuff in the middle, which was I always thought was pretty fun. And from that, I just kind of I started cutting my teeth and exploring my interest in culture stuff as far as writing about it from a just, reporting, but also critical standpoint. And then from there that was the path I was on for the longest time in my career.
Right. So like when you made that switch over, like you were doing sports a little bit already, or you?
Yeah, I did. My first beats at Syracuse were women's soccer, women's tennis. What else? Definitely those two. Those were kind of my big ones, and I did have a lot of fun with that. Swimming and diving was one I covered.
Was that because these other guys were already in place, so these were like the sports?
Yeah. I mean, these are they're just it's a hierarchy and a totally fair one of
sure.
the older students with skins on the wall get to do that, and you kind of work your way up. And I was still working my way up, but I wanted to explore other stuff as well, and then I kind of found myself more interested in that stuff.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I was fortunate enough when senior year came around that there were openings on, oh shoot, so-and-so can't do this story. Are you free to do it? So I got to get my sports swings in too. But by that point, I think I was too far gone in the hippy dippy world of music and culture.
Right. Yeah. I mean, interesting. I'm a little spacey today. I'm going to cut some stuff out. Like this spot right here. So when you first got to Dallas, the Dallas Observer, 2008, what was it like here? What was the scene like?
It was a pretty strong scene, but in some ways a little similar to it is today in that, well, maybe where we're going to be in 2 years. It's like, because Deep Ellum was dead at that point. The city had come in and kind of shut it down. It had gone through its, what I now know to be like 20-year life cycle of boom and bust. At that point, there was a really strong scene on Lower Greenville. You had places like the Cavern at the time. You had places like Billiard Bar and Gazelig, which were really popping. And then, of course, the Granada was in its heyday at that time. Denton was a huge player at that point. So I found myself driving back and forth between Denton and Dallas a ton. But, it's tough for me to not have the same good old boy syndrome that I would get frustrated with my elders with back then. Now, oh, that was the heyday. It was so great. It was so fun. I think everyone just has that time in their life.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
It really was an amazing time. I was going out, I mean, no hyperbole, 5 to 7 nights a week, checking out shows, sometimes as many as 3 to 4 shows a night, just bouncing around.
Oh, yeah.
Just nonstop. And there was some great stuff going on, in those times. We really saw the explosion of the Dallas hip hop scene with the D-Town Boogie, and acts like Duro and Fat Pimp and Playing Skills, or just it's kind of top of the world. That's also when we had some really interesting stuff going on with the old 97s, the Toadies, Erykah Badu, Polyphonic Spree, just kind of your like big rock bands. It was also the start of Sarah Jaffe, which is a really cool thing to cover, and seeing, her growth and kind of the seeds being sown for, the acts that would, that we're seeing now that are blown up, like your Leon Bridges and so on and so forth. And it was a really remarkable time that I look back very fondly on, and just across genres, just seeing so much cool stuff. And, from the punk scene and the hardcore scene, the thrash metal scene with like Power Trip was an amazing thing to witness firsthand. I happened to be at their very first show just by accident because it was the last night of the Red Blood Club, which I was covering, and then just I don't know, countless bands. ADD was, I would argue, still one of the greatest hip hop groups in Dallas history. True Widow, and just their Explosion is this they call it doom gaze, I believe. No, stone gaze, stoner shoegaze, which is just a really amazing sound, and just so many countless incredible bands.
Yeah. Okay. I mean that does sound amazing. That's about the time 2008. Now I guess it was a little later. I was doing the Show Music Showcase, so I kind of have a familiarity with some of those bands. I got to actually edit the first Leon Bridges video, but the thing was he was doing that whole black and white thing, and my boss was like,
"Shout out to Rambo, his
yes,
photographer."
Shout out to Rambo, indeed. Would love to have Rambo on. It was like he was so in love. It was at the Keys Lounge in Fort Worth, and he was so in love with the lighting. And I'm like, dude, I'm telling you, make it black and white. They'll never use it, and they didn't. So, and then he's like, oh, you're right, but it was too late. But anyway, and that's cool.
That's just a setting, right? You can change that in
we
Premiere
could have
pretty
said
easily.
it's just he was in love with the color, so he didn't want to. That's all it was. Like I guess I didn't express to him enough. Like this
You
is
could have done the the black and chrome edition, like they did for Mad Max Fury Road. Give him two versions.
Well, what I wanted to do when he said no, I was like, okay, fine. Well, then do a thing where it starts in black and white and transforms into color.
There you go.
I mean, I had ideas, but anyway, it didn't happen. But I still can say that I edited the first, like, not that he remembers my name anymore, but that's no big deal. I did bump into him at some show, and I was like, hey, and he was like it's cool.
He'll head nod back at you.
He wished me happy birthday for a few years on Facebook.
There
so
you go.
I mean, he's a good guy. I'm not trying to diss him. So how long were you doing Dallas Observer?
I was at the Observer from January 2008 till November 2011, so 4 years.
Okay,
like a month shy of 4 years.
I'm just gonna guess that's kind of a grind for what you're doing, right? That's a lot of going out, a lot of editing, a lot of corralling people.
Oh yeah, I mean, at the time, we had the DC9 at Night blog, which is still kind of like, did they even call it?
Yeah,
anymore?
when I go to the portal, that's what I click on. Yeah.
So yeah, that had launched like 6 months before I started, and we were trying to figure out the balance, and there wasn't a real clear directive from the higher ups at the Observer or at Voice Media Group about what should go in the paper, like how to balance the print stuff and the blog stuff. And I guess what they eventually settled on was 3 to 5 posts a day to the blog, and the things you put in print can't go on the blog. So, and we were expected at the time to fill the largest section of the paper, which was, looking back on it, I think it's about like 5 pages of content a week. I think it's still probably the largest section of the paper, but at the time it was definitely carrying a lot of weight.
Right, it's a smaller paper now, though, so
for sure. Yeah. But that's just the nature of the game.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was a ton of work, and I definitely looked at, some forebears of that post before me, like Robert Wolonsky and Zach Crane and others who held on to that position for a long time, and with a lot of envy that they didn't have to do the website aspect of it. But at the same time, I mean, the truth of the matter is that kind of digital first mentality really shaped a lot of what I ended up doing with the rest of my career. So it kind of forced me into understanding kind of the ways of which I sound super old now, but at the time, that kind of nascent world.
It was like you're an early adapter. I mean, you were kind of one of the people in place to have to figure out how to work that into the system.
In terms of the quote unquote mainstream of it, right? I mean, I wouldn't call an alt weekly too mainstream ever, but that was the peak blog era, right? When people were downloading MP3s off blogs. And shout out to Chris Cannellini of the local Gorilla versus Bear, and even my one-time rivals at We Shot JR were doing that sort of thing as well. So there was, I mean, at the time, there was a joke that my friend and close collaborator Corey Graves said about his blog at the time was he had the 6th best music blog in Dallas. So that you could even make that joke speaks to how many there were.
Right.
So it was a totally different landscape. The Morning News had their weekly publication Quick at that time, which was trying to do the alt weekly thing. So there was a lot of competition that unfortunately just doesn't exist right now in the market. There were music editors at the Morning News and at the Star Telegram, which no longer exist.
Yeah. Preston Jones was here talking about that.
Yeah, and Preston's a good friend and definitely someone that I think I like to think we pushed each other to be a lot better, and having just that competition. I knew. I mean, you know how it goes. You go to a show, you're standing next to the other photographer, you're standing next to the other reviewers. They put you in the same section, and oftentimes right next to each other.
Right next to them, yeah.
It was always kind of a fun thing to go to a show, see Preston next to me, and be like, well, all right, we're both going to have a review up. He's probably going to get his up before mine because I'm a little later to rise than he, but I want to make sure mine's better than his. Or at least, try to come up with a perspective on the show that isn't just the same.
Sure. Oh yeah, that's my biggest challenge. I mean, I wish I could just shoot. I mean, it's rewarding to write, but it's two different brains going into the show.
It is, but I think so I learned to take pictures when I was at the Observer, and that helped me at Central Track as well. And that's something that I'm a big advocate of, actually, is the quote unquote backpack journalist, right? The someone who can take a story from start to finish totally on their own. They can write it, edit it, shoot it, all that, take care of the art. And I think that is, I mean, it might not be for the better, but the truth is that it's just the way budgets work these days. You kind of have to find someone who can multitask. Like
that's true. And I mean, thankfully I went to college and I can write. I mean, I bitch about it a lot on this show. It's just because I think of it as like it's so much harder to my brain than shooting, but it's still rewarding. It's still a different kind of thing.
Well, I think it's, I ended up, one thing that I really loved about once I started shooting shows was the way that a photo would trigger a memory that I didn't have in my notes. Mm-hmm. And, I would often have the photo pass and then go to the review seat. Mm-hmm. And, I'd sneak a few shots up from back there. And it's just that difference in perspective is always a stark and important reminder that, having floor front row seats is a totally different experience than sitting, in the 200 section or wherever they stick 100%. You. So, I always found that perspective to be a interesting and informative one. I understand it's not for everybody, but it's something that definitely kind of informed me and kind of forced me to think about the visual aspect of it all. I think, when you see, like the story card that pops up on Twitter or Facebook, it's absolutely the photo as much as the headline and the social copy that gets someone to click. Oh, yeah. So just thinking in that 360 perspective, I think was really valuable to my growth and just trying to think of, okay, how are all the ways I can suck people in? Because once upon a time, show reviews just had a press photo if they didn't give you photo access.
It still happens like that.
Oh, sure, but it's just that's so much less exciting than that,
And what's frustrating
screaming
me,
into the microphone photo from Eddie Vedder.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What's a bummer to me is that, shows like Pearl Jam, I mean, it was amazing, but then I'm only allowed to shoot in the pit or only allowed to shoot the soundboard, and I don't get the two perspectives. Yeah. And I just wish they would give us like one song at the soundboard after the pit to get that audience and that whole thing. But some venues let you. But
yeah, some venues let you. But I think that's where Central Track really ended up finding its niche of, we would cover big shows, but our niche was the small shows.
Right.
And the great thing about venues, frankly, House of Blues, Granada on down, is once you're in with that pass, you're in.
Yeah.
And I am by no means a super talented photographer, but you fire off 3,000 clicks over the course of a night, you're going to stumble on some gold.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've got sport mode on, continuous shot. And, especially once I had some experience under my belt in terms of finding out the best positions to get that shot in each venue. And thinking like, okay, I got to get from these 5 locations tonight, and here's when I want to be in each one. Again, that informed, I think, the way I wrote about shows as well.
Yeah, it's happened a couple of times where I'm able to send my photos to Preston or the writer before they write it, and I always try to do that.
That's cool.
I don't know if it helps them or not. I'm
sure it does.
I know the Elton John one we did, that David Fletcher I just felt like it was like a perfect marriage of the two, and it was like I don't have that experience a lot, so that was pretty cool.
But then sometimes you end up like looking back at the photos and you see this great sequence of shots, and you're like, well, that's the story. It's not a review anymore. I'm going to talk about what the hell happened in that weird sequence of photos because that begs some questions.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay, so you're at Observer for 4 years, and then what? Like, you just did your time there, you're ready to move
Yeah,
on?
I'd done my time there, and the truth is, I felt like I'd done some really good work. I'd won some national awards, and our numbers were as good as any other music scene in the country as far as comparing myself to the other papers in the Voice Media Group chain. I was just like, all right, where do I go from here? What's next? And the truth of the matter is there just wasn't much opportunity within the company, and I was starting to look outside and think about what was next. And I have contacts in a lot of other cities. I thought about doing the New York thing. I thought about going and trying Chicago, where my sister lives. I thought about going home to Boston. But I was also in a fortunate scenario where, after going out 5-7 nights a week in the city for 4 years and having a really prominent platform in the cultural market, that I was able to I had a ton of contacts, right, as far as both musicians but also business owners, bar and restaurant owners. And I thought this would be a really interesting opportunity to go all the way digital, and I can try something here. And I always wanted to run my own publication or be in charge of a publication and try to exert a vision onto this, greater effort. And the stars just kind of aligned where I thought, well, why not? I'm at the time 27 years old. What do I have to lose if it doesn't work out in a year? I can all those other opportunities aren't going away. Sure. So let's give this a shot. And so I got together with a small group of collaborators, and we just tried to really do a very digital forward thing, which, speaking as the guy who grew up reading the print Boston Globe and, and went to school for newspaper journalism. That's my major. I'm the guy who's supposed to romanticize the ink-stained fingertips on the breakfast nook.
Right.
But as I continued at the Observer, I was more and more struck by how I was consuming news through my phone and my laptop, and almost never picking up a print edition of the Observer or the Morning News. Mm-hmm. I definitely consume the content, but just not through the traditional means.
Sure.
And also looking at the time, still to this day, Dallas continues to grow in its youth population. So I thought there was a whole audience out there that wasn't necessarily being spoken to. I actually looked into the data as we were starting Central Track, and I found out that the average age of the Observer reader was 46, and I was 27. I was like, who the hell am I writing for?
That's interesting.
So I wanted to set out and create a publication that specifically targeted the 18 to 35-year-old, unabashedly, unapologetically, and provide them content through the means that they most likely are to consume it, and the way that they prefer to consume it, and share it, and be an evangelist for it. So that's how we came up with Central Track. It's all right, we're going to talk about the things that the young people in Dallas care about. Bars, restaurants, nightlife, music, culture, fashion, maybe some news, but probably not, property taxes, because no one they're all renters.
Right.
None of them own houses.
Right.
Probably not Dallas ISD, because if these people do have kids, it might not quite be school age. Not the people who care about the music and nightlife and bar scene anyway.
Yeah.
So that's what we set out to do. And on February 12th, 2012, we launched Central Track. I'll always remember we launched on 21212, which we chose just because it sounded cool. Mm. And that ethos of doing something just because it sounds cool is what kept it going for about 10 years.
Yeah. I mean, it was cool. I definitely was consuming that as well as Observer when I got here, and it informed me to like a lot of the local stuff. Because that's the thing. They're really like, that was another question. Like, where do you find local information? I mean, KXT is doing it now a little bit. But who else? I mean, Observer a little bit. Who else, though, really? Yeah,
and our effort with Central Track was always just to be another outlet. We would jab back and forth, certainly with the Observer and with the Morning News, but almost always we were returning fire, not the other way around. Some might disagree with that, but I'll stand by that. And our ethos, if you want to boil it down from a creating content standpoint, was the phrase I'm sure my contributors will attest to that I said ad nauseum was 2 steps further. How do we take this same story idea 2 steps further than anyone else? Because there's a chance that this audience is going to read us and only us, but chances are they're reading the other outlets. They're reading the other culture outlets. They're reading the other TV news outlets, they're reading the daily paper. So how can we create content that even if they've read the other guys, they want to read us too? And so we always return to 2 steps further. So if it's one example I think that I love to share was it was the end of a Texas Rangers baseball season. And rather than just do a story on how, I can't even remember if they did or didn't make the playoffs that year, but just do a season wrap up like that, we decided, okay, let's do an infographic. Let's really design it up. Let's make it cool to look at. Let's go from there. Okay, that's one step. How can we take it even further? Well, a conversation among me and my friends was this Papa John's promotion they had at the time, where if the Rangers scored 7 or more runs and won the game, pizza was half off the next day. And we were all broke, starving artists, excuse me. So when that happened, we were like, oh, it's Rangers 50% off day. Let's go. I'm buying pizza for the gang. So we did a whole series, whole infographic about which pitchers you were most likely to get 50% pizza off the next day, which teams did they play that you got the most free half off pizza for. And it ended up being this really great kind of hit of an article for us that all 3 radio sports stations in town talked about it the next day. And that was great.
Yeah.
Really promotion for us, but also, you know, if you read Tim Kalishaw at the Dallas Morning News' recap on why the Rangers should be super disappointed in not making the playoffs, you know, you're not going to not read what we did because it's so different. But maybe you only read what we do. That's cool too.
Yeah.
But that was a lot of what drove our content. And I think, just to hear myself talk it out, a lot of that relates to that cutting my teeth with sitting next to Preston and being like, how can I make sure what I'm doing is different?
Right. That competition.
How can I make sure that, you know, that people are going to want to read both? They don't want to read, it's not, oh, I'll read Peter or I'll read Preston. Or let's be honest, the Star Telegram or the Observer. It wasn't the bylines necessarily people were coming for.
Sure.
But just trying to make sure we need to be different. How can we be different? What am I going to notice that the other guy isn't?
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, that's kind of what it is. It's like, or who can express it like cooler, you know?
Yeah. Well, not even necessarily cooler, just in a different way. In a way that you want to also read and also consume.
Right.
There's plenty of eyeballs to go around. It's one thing in my older age I can concede is there's enough of a slice of pie for plenty of people.
Yeah,
to get theirs.
I agree because like with the photo thing, like I'm competing. I mean, you at Observer, I'm competing with other people, but I'm at the point now where I'm like, man, there's too much to cover anyway. So it's just
oh my god,
as well. You know?
It's insane. I mean, and especially with the kind of dearth of music coverage in the town right now, there's just so much you can cover. Yeah, because no one is going to cover it, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. Like
you feel compelled to. There's a responsibility you feel to the scene.
Yeah, like that Brad Hauser thing. Like I was like, if I don't cover I mean, I tried to get someone else to cover when I didn't know if I was going to be there. Yeah, and if they would have been there too, that would have been great. I would have been okay with that too. Totally. But
bring them on. The more the merrier. And looking back on that, you opened this podcast, but kind of asked me like, what was that scene like when I first came to town? And I think that's what I think most fondly about was there were all these people through their coverage, for better or worse, promoting the scene and being a bullhorn and letting people know that this existed. Mm-hmm. And I think that tragically that isn't the case as it not on the level that it once was. Sure.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, when I lived in LA, I was trying to be an actor musician, and I was so like my ego was driving a lot of it. And then when I came here, maybe it's because I was older or already gave up on all that. And it's like, the more I cover other people and prop other people up, the more that's what I want to do. I don't even care about anything else.
Listen, I sound like a big softy my old age, because back when I was, had a chip on my shoulder, and I did. And I was the bad boy. And that's where the name kind of came from jokingly. I did get annoyed. I think the competitive nature really drove me. It wasn't necessarily knowing that other people weren't going to cover it, but I wanted to be first, and I wanted to be better, and I wanted to be different.
Yeah. Well, I think
that was ultimately that was the game for me.
Yeah.
That's what really kind of did it for me.
I could see that. That's cool. I mean, the old days, I do wish that we had more people covering things, but I guess it's just a matter of,
Yeah. Well, what's interesting and what I think a lot about, and this is something I think a lot about in my present capacity as the digital director at WFAA, is there still are plenty of eyeballs in ways that things are being covered. It's just not in the traditional way. Mm-hmm. You look at, Instagram accounts like Dallas Sites 101 and, Oh Hey Dallas. And there's just a bajillion of those that are maybe not being as critical as maybe I would want them to be, but they're certainly doing a great job of meeting people on the medium where they are and letting people know. I think food stuff is still getting a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And music stuff does too, for sure. As far as, everyone laments the, sea of phones that go up at a concert at like Drake or something. But that sea of phones is how a video goes viral in which he's telling a fan from Japan he's going to fly them back to Japan first class for coming to a show.
Yeah.
And then that becomes a big story about an event that happened in Dallas. Now, maybe that's not, talking about this great concert that took place at Club Dot on a Wednesday, but it's still attention. And, as easy as it is for, someone who's been doing it in this town for 15 years to blow off your TikToks and whatnot, I'm really fascinated by it. And I'm constantly looking at how can I try to, harness that power for myself.
I mean, I studied video editing and I'm good at it. I can't do it on a phone. It just drives me crazy. And like a lot of those apps.
Well, you might want to learn.
Oh, no. I mean, I just need to you know what I need to do? I need to do it on my iPad, which is just a big phone.
Ultimately. Oh, you mean literally just the size of it?
The size of it.
I mean, you can even do it on your laptop. Just change the aspect ratio.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's ways, but then it's just like, it's 10 more steps and whatever. I'm not complaining.
Well, I can tell you it goes a long way. I mean, I can, just like YouTube Shorts has been a big boon for us at WFAA.
Right.
It's caused our numbers to skyrocket in the last couple of months, and we really committed to it. Reels on Instagram. Instagram feeds creators who produce reels to their audiences.
Oh, sure.
So you do want to be aware of those trends and meet the audience where they are.
Well, I am.
And you don't want to be a slave to the algorithm, and you want to be spread out across many so that you're not totally fucked if any one of them goes down.
Sure.
But you certainly want to be aware of it all, and at least, you got to play the game a little bit.
Well, I mean, for me, the way I'm playing the game is I hired someone to make my reels. So I'm getting them, but I'm spending a little bit of money, but
there you
it's
go.
just, it's happening that way.
That's good for the economy.
Yeah, no, I feel good that I'm helping my friend who does a great job for me. She's out of LA, Lisa Mueller. I should name her Lisa Mueller. I'm going to say it again because you sneezed.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I just want to give her credit. So during COVID, when we were all locked in, you were out there getting a COVID test before everyone else. You were like at a protest on a bridge where it's like it went haywire. Like, first of all, I was thinking to myself, I'm glad you're doing it because I would never fucking be doing this right now.
I mean, I felt compelled to do it. I mean, so part of it is we had to keep going. When COVID hit, we lost, we were very focused on music, nightlife, bars, restaurant culture.
Yeah.
Those were our advertisers. And when COVID hit and those places were shut down, I totally understand why, but all those people killed their advertising first.
Yep.
And, we pivoted eventually to a Patreon model, and that definitely kept our lights on a little bit longer. But part of it is, for better or worse, I'm a slave to this game, and I consider myself a journalist and a communicator, and this was stuff that was of interest to me, and I knew would be of interest to the audience, and I had to get a COVID test, and it wasn't just like I'm gonna go get a COVID test. I had to get a COVID test, and if I'm gonna sit in that line for 4 hours, I'm not gonna waste my time. I'm gonna try to create content out of it and try to talk about how my experience, share how my experience played out, and maybe that helps inform some others. And that story, I think, when I was sitting in my car without AC for 4 hours in the summer heat down by the AAC, that story did very well for us, and it got picked up by a couple TV stations here in town too. They interviewed me about that story, which was wild to me. It was like, well, you guys should have done this. It wasn't that hard of a story to come up with. You could have done it yourself.
Right.
So, but yeah, they came, they wanted to hear about my experience. And, one thing that I've always harped on to my contributors and collaborators and, partners in content creation is, and this is something I learned back in my Daily Orange days in college, is if you and your friends are talking about it, people are probably interested in it.
Huh.
One of my most popular stories I did in college, it started from the stupidest idea, where it was a pitch meeting for the arts and entertainment and / lifestyle contributors, and it was just one of those days where no one had any energy, no one was really pitching anything, and the editor of that section got really frustrated, and he was just like, "Guys, come on, what's going on in your life? Let's talk about it." And I kind of sheepishly raised my hand. I was like, "Well, I'm pretty fucking hungover." And he's like, "Really? Is that what you're going through right now?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "How about we write about it?" And I was like, "Okay, maybe I can figure out a way to write about it." And I went and I talked to the school, like, student health and services department about what causes a hangover, and then I guinea pigged 5 different ways to cure my hangover, and it ended up being this kind of like satirical but ultimately filled with genuine interviews story that did quite well, and that really opened my eyes to life experiences are not always that unique. They're very shared. Mm-hmm. A lot of people are going through the same stuff, and if not, they might know someone who's going through that, and they're gonna be interested in it just the same. So going back to COVID, yeah, I mean, there were just so many questions at that time, and a lot of the content you saw around town on COVID was very dry, very numbers based, very daily press conference from Clay Jenkins. This is what's going on, blah, 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 fact,
Sure.
fact. And there's absolutely value in that very straightforward presentation. But I was at that point, 8 years into Center Track and had a good sense of our audience and knew that's not how this is going to resonate with people. And I thought it was important to, disseminate that information because I was interested in it too. And I was like, oh, well, what? Okay, that they just put out this long press release. Well, what am I interested in? Okay. Schools, okay, whatever. Bars and restaurants have to shut down. That's interesting. Gyms are going to have to shut down. That's interesting. Music venues are going to have this stuff. That's really interesting. Now they're doing margaritas to go. That's hella interesting. What does it mean for curbside pickup? That's crazy interesting. So we weren't necessarily too focused on things like schools, and I think we definitely disseminated information about just the raw numbers because at times it was very just shocking and gobsmacking to see X number of people tested positive and this Z number of people died as a result of this. So, we shared that information, of course, but trying to really cherry pick the stuff that we thought was of interest to the young people who, frankly, were much more likely to go out and get in trouble if they weren't paying attention.
Sure.
So we were just trying to do a call to arms there. And then when the George Floyd murder took place, it was, at that point, we'd covered a lot of protests at Central Track throughout the years too. And, we knew that political action definitely got our audience going. I think dating back to Trump's election, I think a lot of young people got a lot more outspoken and interested in politics, whether they necessarily showed up at the polls is a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But they definitely were interested in that and interested in social activism. That was something we saw. And it was just a horrible thing that, raised a lot of emotion and feelings and sentiment in myself. And B, if you looked at who was protesting, it was young people. It was our reader.
Yeah.
So I felt a real diligence to go out and cover what they're interested in and why they're out there and why this is important to them and what change they want. And, it's absolutely the injustice, right, of it all. But also, it's not every day that young people feel that emboldened to go out and make their voice heard. Mm-hmm. And I felt it really important that we go out and amplify that. I also knew just from consuming other people's coverage that they were very much taking a 30,000 foot view, sometimes literally from a helicopter. And I also knew that a lot of these reporters at other outlets in town were under directives from their editors for legal and safety reasons they had to stay X number of yards away from the protests and couldn't engage.
Wild. Okay.
And as in seeing all that, I was just like, well, someone's got to tell this story. And it was really just a matter of, if I felt a real responsibility to our audience and the city, frankly, that I've come to call home. And it was just wild. And I didn't, I think a lot of the coverage in this town can often be, and frankly in any town, can be very pro-police. And this was a time to, allow the other side a chance to say their part. And if no one else was doing that, and I didn't see anyone else doing it, then I had to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I mean, maybe you take it for granted, but it just, you are so a true journalist. I mean, maybe you
Try to be.
I mean, you develop the skills with like specifically like for your audience, but everything I'm hearing, it's just like, you just have that eye that you like see it like through that journalistic, like how does this relate to the people that need to hear about
I've been
it?
doing it for so long, man. I mean, I got my first byline in my hometown paper when I was 14 years old. I'm 39 years old now, so I've been doing this for 25 years.
Wow.
And it's just how I view the world. I notice, like, when a friend or something passes or someone I know passes, that's oftentimes how I'm able to like be of service is I can write an obituary that really honors this person, and that's how I can help. And I know this, like, I'm friends with so-and-so who's going through a hard time, and they're getting bombarded with questions, but they know and trust me, and they can talk to me, and they know that I'm going to answer the questions for them. They'll talk to Pete, and I'm done with questions. Pete will answer the questions. I'll get an article up.
Right.
And that's a way I can be of service to people in times of need. And that's, I don't know what it is, but it comes back to that journalism where at this point, like, that's even part of my grieving process sometimes, is having to write that obituary.
I see that. I could see that. Yeah.
And be, doing that act of service, because that's one of the tragic things about having covered the music scene for so long, is I've seen so many beautiful, talented people lose their lives at too young an age.
And it's like you're friends with these people because you've been covering them. You're like around them.
Yeah, I mean, they're your peers and your colleagues and your contemporaries, and it's just like, it hits you like a ton of bricks when it happens. And there's a responsibility you have to be that mouthpiece in those times of needs for that community that you cover.
Totally.
One thing I talk a ton about to other journalists is not being a tourist in the world that you cover, but being a citizen of it.
That is very cool. Very well said.
And there's a respect that is required of being a journalist. It's you can't just take, you have to give as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, cause I'm new to photography. So there was this transition where I didn't really know people, and then I did it for enough years where now people recognize, now I know them. Now I know the significance of who this person is and why.
Especially once that trust is built, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I have the luxury of, like, I'm taking photos and I'm decent at it. So people like give me a little bit more space maybe than if I was just writing or something. I don't know. But anyway, so then this is kind of, at this point then, COVID pretty much is what shut down Central Track, I'm assuming.
Yeah. I mean, yes and no. I mean, there was, the ads never fully came back.
Yeah.
A couple came back, and the Patreon was great, but I also felt kind of guilty about it. We weren't able to produce on the level. There weren't as much events. And then also, the truth of the matter is, I talked about the 18 to 35-year-old demo. I aged out of it.
True. Yeah.
And so I worked with some really great kind of next generation editors of Central Track, and they Frances Tingle and Stephanie Salas Vega, who did a great job for about a year at the helm.
Yeah, with Stephanie on here.
Yeah, she's incredible, and I'm so proud of her, and
she's
so proud of so much of what Central Track contributors have gone on to do. It's like such a point of pride for me, and just to see, I don't know, if to have offered them a platform and see what they've done with it, because it's so hard for a young journalist to get a platform.
Yeah.
Is really cool and really fulfilling. And I don't say that to take any credit. I say that to just be so proud of when you see someone take a baton and run with it. It's just amazing.
Definitely.
But so we tried that for a little while, but the ads just never really came back. And it kind of, it just didn't make sense as much as I wanted to. I am not a man of means to be able to just pay them to keep going. So eventually, the pragmatist in me and realist in me took over, and just like, okay, we got to shut it down. Now, I will say, the site is still online. It's still active, in the sense that the website is live, and I will tell you, it still gets a shocking number of monthly clicks. You know, you write 15,000 articles that are of things that are of interest to people, and that creates a certain search engine optimization gravity that perpetuates over time. And it's funny because we didn't really start getting a ton of great traffic until about year 6 or 7. And the traffic we're getting today, a year and a half, 2 years after we went dark, is still comparable to what we were getting in like years 6 and 7.
Wow.
And every now and then a nibble comes along and someone's like, hey, what's going on with Central Track? I might be interested in taking that over. And my hope is that someone does. And I think, you know, we're having some, I can't get into the specifics, but I'm currently having pretty fruitful conversations about some potentially good stewards. And I would love, for the reasons we've talked about throughout this podcast, for it to be able to come back and be another voice in the scene and in the market.
Yeah.
And maybe it's in a different way that is, like we were saying earlier, more TikTok and Instagram heavy. But, you know, as a brand, Central Track has a ton of followers still on all these prominent social platforms and a very diverse followership across the platforms. And yeah, I'm still holding out hope that it, you know,
I would love to see it.
It's
come
not
back.
dead yet. Hopefully it'll do that like Undertaker meme one of these days and just sit up straight in his coffin and people will just gasp at its return.
We're getting close to the end, but like I just want to touch on. So you did mention it, but then after this, you're currently the digital marketing director.
I'm no, not marketing. Director of digital content.
Okay.
So what my role is to oversee all of the content that WFAA produces, news content, that basically isn't on broadcast, and oftentimes taking the broadcast content and putting it online. But so the website, our social media, our mobile app, our newsletters, which have fallen a little off on purpose because there just isn't as much interest in those as there used to be, and just our OTT, which is our streaming platform, our 24/7 streaming platform on your smart TV. Just trying to proliferate this content, and again, going back to that thing of meeting people where they are. And knowing that we've got great journalists who are doing great work and covering interesting stories, and taking that content and shaping it for the audiences on each individual platform, and also leading a team of 9 other journalists to not just massage that content that the TV reporters and anchors are doing, but to create content ourselves that is of great relevance and interest to the entire DFW market and beyond. One thing that still blows my mind to this day, 2 years into this role, is that WFA's broadcast signal, and thus our coverage market, is 31 counties. It stretches from, Erath to Johnson, and all points in between. But you think Dallas, Denton, Fort Worth, Tarrant. But Rockwall certainly, and all the ones around, and then the ones around that, and it expands 30 counties, basically from Waxahachie to the Red River, and then about Tyler to approaching Abilene.
Huh. Oh, that's cool.
It's wild. That's a huge burden and responsibility.
Yeah.
And realizing we will get an email from someone in Aledo if we're covering too much in Plano. It's like, hey, don't forget about us. We have this crazy thing going on. But by that same token, we're certainly never lacking for interesting things to cover.
Sure.
And, at least from like a straightforward news perspective, when you're not shining a light in some of these smaller counties, man, there is some incredible corruption that can go on.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just like, because they don't have their local paper like they used to 50 years ago.
Also, nobody's keeping an eye.
No, if nobody's keeping tabs, a lot of these bad guys will go and take advantage of it. And so we try to do our diligence in covering as best we can, and we're by no means perfect at it, but covering that whole market, with a yeoman's effort.
Wow, that sounds like a lot. And then you. In this, are you still getting to be creative, like find stories, or you're too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think one thing, one thing that I miss is I'm not necessarily in the daily mix as much as I was before, just because the scale of what we're doing is so much larger. But also the team I have is a lot larger. And while there are certain responsibilities that keep me from necessarily, writing you know, 10 stories a day, which I've done at Central Track and the Observer before. You know, I think there's a lot of value in pointing out like, okay, we need to be on this, we need to be on that. And one thing that I have learned a lot about it at WFAA that I frankly didn't have the expertise in before was the value of search engine optimization and really looking for content and trying to come up with the content that people are going to have questions about, like answering that question before they ask it. Whereas before at Central Track, certainly, excuse me, we were completely social based in our content dissemination.
Right.
And that's a you know, you want to be diverse in the way people are approaching finding your content. So we work a lot about that. And yeah, I'm trying to think of a great example. I think of being able to still flex that creativity is, you know, I'll backtrack and say that when I took this job and when I was tempted to leave Central Track at first, and I was flirting with WFAA about taking this job, the thing that kind of set me over and said, okay, this is the move. This is what I'm ready for it, and they're ready for me. Is they told me in the interview process they want me to take risks, they want me to push boundaries. They're not looking for someone who just does what the higher ups think are going to want, but kind of puts the higher ups in an uncomfortable position and forces them to say no and be like, "Whoa, slow down. I don't know about that," and just try to, you know, be on that bleeding cutting edge. And I think a recent example that just pops to mind in which that still is manifesting, and it's also just giving my journalists the permission to do that, because, you know, TV, you know, digital journalists don't necessarily haven't always historically thought about, you know, doing that half price pizza story. Right. So when the Donald Trump mugshot and arrest happened in Georgia, and it came out with his stated height and weight, I gave my team the green light and was like, we have to do a story in which we compare his height and weight to the most prominent athletes in Dallas.
Yeah, I remember this.
So we did, you know, it was like Jamie Benn from the Dallas Stars is the same height and weight as Donald Trump. And, you know, I don't think that's partisan either. I think that's just like pointing out the absurdity of it all. And,
yes.
Absurdity is not party specific. And I think, you know, just that's a story that I don't think you would necessarily traditionally see at the CBS or Fox or NBC station in town. And I think knowing that the higher ups knew my background, and I think specifically were interested in me because of my Central Track background, because we pushed those boundaries. Knowing that we had that green light to do that was just cool. And, you know, people really got engaged with that story in both positive and negative ways, but it was content they weren't finding elsewhere.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad that you're at WFAA because you have a bigger reach, and I think I like that there's somebody there that is going to keep people honest.
Trying to, and then and also just, you know, where possible, I also try to, you know, point the coverage back to the music scene when I can. I think one thing that I'm really proud of is on my very first week, we were able to get a music story on TV. I found out that Alex Bohr, music producer in Oak Cliff, he used to be in This Will Destroy You, and he's been a producer for a number of other bands in town, a member of other bands in town. I found out that he composed the music to the latest Halo video game.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
super cool, right?
Yeah.
So I brought that up in a meeting, and I was like, guys, this is amazing. No one else is going to cover this. This will do quite well for us, and it did. And, you know, I was able to get that buy-in and able to get local music on, you know, your 10 o'clock news, which is no small feat.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Pete, thank you so much for coming over.
Thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Yeah, it's been great. So everybody's going to keep an eye out at WFAA for all your stuff.
Yeah, WFAA.com and, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube is a big one. We do a lot of stuff on YouTube. We just wrapped up a major effort on YouTube where we live streamed the entirety of the Ken Paxton impeachment trial, which is a huge undertaking. And then, but I think that speaks to kind of what we're trying to do. We have a very ambitious team. I think I'm still just as ambitious and boundary pushing as ever, just on a different scale. So yeah, please follow along with the ride.
Awesome. Thanks again, Pete.
Thanks for having me.
I'd like to thank my guest, Pete Freedman. You can check him out, WFAA, wherever they are. He's probably behind it. Theme song, Unstoppable by Celine Narala. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, follow, all the good stuff, and share it with your friends. We'll see you next time.